Hi, everybody. I think we might be live. Today I have with me Harry. We're doing a vanilla SE session to start. Harry, would you like, before we hit you up for your claim, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us something about you that we should know.
Sure, yeah. So I also practice SE myself, so I'm familiar with doing street epistemology, and I've also practiced it not only online, but actually on the streets in person. I've probably been doing it for about, I think, 2 years now. And I really enjoy its concepts. I think it does lead to better conversations.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Do you have links to your media that you have out there yet? Not yet?
Currently, it's all secretive and unrecorded.
Okay. I will be one of your subscribers when you do, I promise. I want that. I want the Harry channel.
Fair enough.
Okay. So, your claim. What is your claim today? What are you bringing to us?
Right. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring a claim that has a moral slant to it, because I think that these are some of the more difficult SE sessions when the interlocutor or IL has a claim that is based on good or bad. And so dissecting what they mean by good or bad and their confidence level according to their particular claim, I think is quite tricky. And so I thought it'd be good to show your skills, Dali, in trying to figure out how you navigate that.
Okay, we'll see how I do.
Okay, sure.
Just for everybody who's watching, Harry has been practicing SE for some months longer than I have. So if I have leaped to being any good at this, I blame some people whom will be guests in a few weeks. Okay, and Harry, I blame Harry partially, no doubt about it. Okay, so what would be the claim?
Okay,
you said you'd like to bring a claim with a moral thing.
Yes, so it'll have good in it. I believe that I am a better person or a good person if I'm vegan. I believe that I'm a better person if I'm vegan.
So is this a claim about you or a claim about people in general?
This is a claim about me.
About you, okay.
Although it could potentially spin into a broader
person because vegan. I hope I'm spelling that correctly. I can't see the screen, so I'm just gonna trust that I typed it correctly. So what I got is Harry is a better person because vegan.
Basically.
How confident are you that that is true? Scale of 100.
I am 95% confident.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Oh, good. Thank you. Good. It looks good. All right. So defining terms in here. Harry, that's you. Better, that's easy. Better person, sure. Because vegan. Vegan means not consuming animal products or things that require like the enslavement of, or whatever we do with animals.
Right. Often it's a consumer stance, which means that you try as best as possible. First of all, it comes with eating, so you don't eat any livestock products generally. And you tend to also, from a consumer basis, so sometimes it will also spread into clothing and maybe even medicine, like people animal testing or cosmetics, things like that. But yeah, so it's the basic idea that you should try and have a lifestyle that doesn't involve animal products.
Okay. So why is it better to avoid animal products?
Right. So for me, I think it's better to involve. It's better not to have animal products because of the system in place in which those animal products come from, and so those animal products, in my mind, cause unnecessary suffering and harm, and not enough gain for that type of harm. Because there are circumstances where we think that harm is beneficial or suffering is necessary in order for us to reach an end goal that's even better. But I don't think that that balance is there with the majority of the animal products that are out there today. And I also believe that the clarity in which to make those decisions means that abstinence at the moment is one of the better options because it's very difficult to tell whether that balance has actually been met or not.
Okay, so in a case where harm and suffering might be justified and might not be justified, we should lean toward assuming that they are not until we know better.
Yes, we should be more cautious.
Okay. Could you describe for me what would be the kinds of things that would justify some harm or suffering?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that if, as a point of it, it then avoided further harm down the road. So we could think about a certain moral situation in which it's necessary to cause harm in order to stop the harm of many others. So I could give a really easy example. For instance, killing someone who is going on a rampage and killing other people. We are going to do harm to that individual, but by doing harm to that individual, we are preventing harm for many other individuals.
Yeah. So it becomes an instant trolley problem with guns, maybe.
Yeah, and to bring it slightly closer to my claim, I'd say an example might be closer to the mark in terms of acceptable might be that you've got someone who's starving or someone who needs to eat an animal product in order to live or avoid unbearable suffering. And what they do to that animal in order to avoid that suffering is justified in that context.
Okay, so a starving hunter is justified.
Could be. That would be a good example, yeah.
Yeah, okay, very good. Okay, so what did you use to come to these conclusions? What kind of sources did you use to learn that this was true? How do you... I'll stop asking too many questions. Go ahead.
What was the first
questions?
What was the first one? How did I come to it?
Yeah, how did you come to this conclusion, which is sort of like, what sources did you use? How did you learn what suffering was?
So I think in my mind, it came from a simple projection of my own life and my own thoughts and feelings. So I realized that, I suffer and there are circumstances which don't feel good for me. And then extending that to my pets, I realized I valued the fact that my pets mean a lot to me. And I saw myself as being hypocritical because I valued my pets because I could see that a dog could experience pain and suffering. And I'd find it intolerable to see, for instance, my dog treated in the same way that a livestock animal might be treated. Yet the biology seemed to tell me, and the behavioral studies seem to tell me, that they seem to have similar emotive lives and can have similar levels of suffering. And they maybe in some creatures even more, maybe they may even have faculties that basically prepare them for even greater levels of suffering depending on the environment. So they might be even more intelligent than dogs, for instance.
So capacity for intelligence relates to capacity for suffering.
I think so. I think there's some merit in that. Now, that may not be the case. We may learn that, the feeling of pain doesn't have to have any intelligence associated with it. So it could be that there are what we'd classify as unintelligent animals, for instance, let's say fish, but they have the same capacity of pain as dogs. I think that's a very difficult thing to pass. I'm definitely not an expert in that field, so I'm unsure how behaviorally they figure stuff like that out. I think they do things like blood tests, they do pain avoidance tests, things like that, and they try and draw correlates between different species that they are more certain about, and try and understand how pain is kind of codified into behavior and how it might be helpful or not. So one of the key things is that movement, for instance. So it may be that an animal isn't very intelligent, but we know that if an animal moves, it's more likely to be able to experience pain because that's beneficial for its survival. Whereas animals that are on a seabed, for instance, like a mussel, it doesn't have any advantage in involving pain because it cannot avoid that particular damage. And so there's a suggestion that therefore, as an animal, they don't experience pain in the way that we would imagine other animals do, or mammals specifically.
Okay. So I'm probably okay with all the yeast I want for my beer.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that fungi doesn't seem to experience pain. No.
Very good. So that's very good. Okay, so let's see, methods. You got your sources. The sources seem very, very direct and reasonable. So what could you learn tomorrow? it doesn't have to be something that's true, that would increase your confidence from 95 to say 98, that you're a good person for holding vegan practices.
Right. I think what would increase my confidence is if I learned a little bit more about some of the underlying conscious states that these animals experience and feel, even in some of the products that are seemingly justified.
Okay.
And I think that I would increase my confidence. One of the lines that I find very tricky is the balance between my own individual actions and the actions of others. And one of the reasons I give such a high confidence level to the fact that I think I am a good person because I'm vegan, or I should say a better person, really, because I am vegan, is that if I weren't vegan, what would those practices do to others? What would be the consequences of those practices? And so if I learned that the consequences of those practices would definitely reduce animal suffering, so I could see a much more direct correlation between the products I buy and then the market change and then a change in the way that we treat animals, then that would definitely boost my confidence even more.
Okay, good. That seems a very, very direct hypothetical. Good. Thank you for that. How about the hypothetical in the other direction? What could reduce you to 90 or 70?
Yeah. So I think part of the calculation of suffering is to do with food security, so famine, things like that. So if what would reduce my confidence is if I was in a particular situation where I thought, actually, we should promote livestock production in certain countries or in certain instances, or use certain livestock products in order to prevent suffering. So I think there's something like 800 million people who are malnourished in the world today. And so if there was an example in which actually promoting livestock agriculture in a particular context was helpful to prevent that kind of suffering, and I saw the moral calculation as something where the suffering of the livestock is not the equivalent of the suffering of children, for instance, having iodine deficiency, then that would shift my confidence slightly. Another thing that would shift my confidence would be if I somehow, being vegan had the opposite effect. So instead of it instilling consequences, instilling practices in others which stop them from a particular behavior that I deem as bad, so causing unnecessary suffering, if it caused them to double down, so actually my practices cause people to eat more meat or favor practices which, and we know this is a psychological effect. So if my behavior somehow actually pushed others to consume more meat or have practices that I would back down from a vegan position, or maybe rethink it slightly.
So if you caused perverse behavior, that's an interesting.
So actually, my practice.
I like that. Yeah, because I'm hearing that your goal is to reduce the unnecessary kind of suffering, the unjustified harm. So now, if I put suffering and harm into one box, I almost want to ask a separate claim. Is that the best moral test?
Right.
Are there other equal or better moral tests?
Yes. Yeah. I think that we certainly have moral intuitions that might be different from using that as a metric, right? So we'll have different ones, and we'll have ones that are maybe to do with loyalty, and we'll have ones which are to do with fitting in with the certain in-group that we have. Those will be some moral intuitions that we have. I would say that ultimately under all of that, it's about preferential conscious states, so states in which we are happy, elated, we have a resilience, and we feel well. And I think that I think that that's the best way to measure it. And I can't see at the moment. I can't see I can't see how I could be convinced of a different way of codifying morality that would be as helpful or as useful. But I'm open to being convinced otherwise. If there is, maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe there's a different aspect that needs to be brought in that I haven't considered.
Okay. Thank you. Astrofair, could you attempt to mute? So let's see. It seems that the values you're expressing.
Is it 4:30?
Direct.
15.
Please mute the wee one. Thank you. Thank you. Where was I? The values you are expressing do directly point to the goodness of your claim. As long as I accept those values as reasonable, I have no reason to argue that this makes you better. You're following your values very well. It seems like your data sources are right in line with the kind of things I would find compelling. So, what do I know? But I think your epistemology in this certainly passes my opinions. And I really like your engagement with the hypotheticals. They show me that you are not in any way stuck on your position and can't imagine what would falsify it. So excellent. Extra thumbs up. We managed to get through in 15 minutes, which is not actually surprising with somebody who's used to critical thinking. We tend to fall through the checklist very quickly.
Yeah.
In that case, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you ask those questions yourself, right? If you are well versed in asking those questions to others, it only takes a small amount of time before you start reflecting yourself and asking yourself those same questions. I would say that there may be some disagreements with other people who hold a vegan position that I hold, in that they might have a deontology or a rule-based moral system, which is that all animals within the animal kingdom should not be consumed or eaten, whereas mine's based on suffering, which is
right. For them, it's in group. For you, it's empathy.
Right.
Yeah.
So it could be that there are animals, there are animals within the animal kingdom, and I think that there are animals within the animal kingdom which don't have suffering in the same degree that we, they have the same degree of suffering as, let's say, a plant or a fungi, and therefore I would say that they don't fit within that framework. And there's another aspect to this where I think the overall goal is not just about. So when I say I'm a better person, I'm 95% confident that I'm a better person. I think part of that being a better person is trying to get others to be a better person as well. So I've smuggled something in there, which is about kind of how my values towards other people and what the values that I want other people to take on as well. And that's part of my moral framework. So, well, as I said before, if I found that actually it was causing people to eat more meat, then I would have to rethink the way that is. And I find that sometimes I will eat meat, for instance. So an example, a couple of weeks ago, my dad had ordered liver, I think, because it was very cheap at the butchers. And I want to encourage whole animal eating, and I want to encourage people to eat as much, to be as least wasteful as possible, because I see on the degree of things, you've got eating no meat, and then you've got eating ethically sourced possible meat as possible, and then you've got like minimum waste. Like if I think terrible practices have to go ahead, I want there to be maximum utility after those terrible practices have gone ahead. And I want to convince others that my position is tenable. So kind of in the spirit of street epistemology, it's about engaging with the individual and making them see that you can bridge divides and have difficult conversations. And so in that instance where I took a bit of meat off my dad's plate and ate it and tasted it with him, it was a way to say, it was appealing to those moral intuitions, which is that I'm part of the same group as you are. So it's kind of come into the same group that I am, and also recognize that, my position isn't untenable. So so you're showing the kind of behaviors that you want other people to take on and manifest. And a similar example. So this week I ate a bit of, my girlfriend was having fish and chips at the sea. And so I ate some of the chips, and I also tried some of the fish with her. And food is a big part of the way that she shows love. And so I know that by taking part in that, it's important for her, but also she then reflects, it encourages her to then also try my food and think more about vegan dishes and vegan lifestyle and so on and so forth. So part of that is my veganism, my confidence in being a better person is about also the behaviors of others and how I think I'm going to convince people to take on my particular moral position.
Yeah. Professor Rabinowitz taught me that recruitability is key, really critical.
It is. Yeah.
I think you might have been there at the time.
I might well been. Yeah. He's really great at having some of those, speaking to those truths.
Yeah. For everybody else, this is a professor of philosophy that deals in ethics, business ethics, that sort of thing, that we have managed to speak to many times over the last 6 months. He's taught us good things.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to hide behind neutrality. Do you have any questions that you want to ask from me before I open it up to the audience?
Yeah, I want to ask whether there's anything that you see here. I feel like I'm speaking to the same kind of moral. I feel like we're speaking the same moral language anyway. So I feel like
Okay.
there's not a huge difference between the two of us, and they might
Sure.
well be a huge difference between us. There are some things where I think that you have a cognitive dissonance around. So if I was to be really blunt,
bet.
like I think that the way that you love chickens but then might eat meat, for instance, I think that there is a dissonance there. And I would be more tactful.
I'm aware of the irony, especially if I eat chicken in front of them. That's especially ironic.
Or feed it to them. No, I'm kidding.
I'm careful to not do that. I have issues.
I actually see nothing morally wrong with cannibalism, but there we go. That's a conversation.
Right. I don't hold it away from cannibalism just because I think it's icky. I mean, I do, but I wouldn't use that reason. It's prion diseases. I want to avoid those.
Yes. Yeah, there you go. So I suppose for me, I want to see whether there's something in my logic that I'm missing here, right? Because I said I don't think that there's a better way to underlie moral claims other than kind of conscious states, and that whether that thing is experiencing a nice state or basically a worse or really bad state. And to me, that seems like the best way to form to basically frame whether something is good or bad. But I'm not. I don't know whether I'm missing something here. And I suppose my question to you is it obvious that I'm missing something? Is there something that seems to be lacking?
People who know us might recognize that Harry is a moral realist and thinks that there are objective moral truths. And I am a moral arealist, and I am very uncertain as to whether there are objective moral truths. So for me, when I'm looking at your values, and I'm saying your values don't seem to have some obvious messed up thing about them, you're choosing a particular goal in mind, and I think what you're choosing is very much in line with that goal. I don't have much of an opinion as to, I think your goal is bad. I think there can be goals that might be more important, but I'm not sure that we'd even be arguing about that. If we're being invaded and we need to defend ourselves, veganism is not what we're talking about today. we're talking about something else, and so I don't see there's a conflict in that.
Okay, nice.
Okay,
well, I don't have anything more to add.
Is there anything from the text chat that seems important? Production?
Yeah, we have a great question from one of our viewers. It's 3xk asking, knowing that there are some cases of humans who can't feel pain, would it be, if possible, a solution to artificially breed animals like that for food? So, in other words, if we had a way to breed animals that don't have the ability to feel pain, where would you stand on that, I guess is the question.
Right. I think that's a great question. I think for me, I think it depends. So let's take lab-grown meat, for instance. One of the problems with lab-grown meat is often they require stem cells already, so they actually require livestock products in the first place to make. So there's important caveats around the life cycle of creating that particular animal and the impacts of that particular life cycle. But taking it as a neatly packaged hypothetical without those kind of messy real world implications, just pretending like they aren't, and just whether I was offered a plate of meat that came from an animal that could feel pain and it came from an animal that couldn't feel pain, I'd choose the one where the animal couldn't feel pain because my ultimate moral rubric is suffering.
Okay, good. Everybody may unmute and throw chairs. Does anybody have any commentary things they'd like to ask Harry about this? Any feedback they'd like to give us about this Elenchus? Any other comments? They're all so used to being muted.
I know you've taught them well.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, if you want, Juggling, if they're still saying it's muted, we can move on to the next proportion, which is about chapter 7 in Impossible Conversations.
Chapter 7. Okay. So yes, if anybody does have any commentary, we can jump back and forth between topics, no problem. So Harry had some thoughts that he'd like to express about Chapter 7 of How to Have Impossible Conversations by Doctors Bogosian and Lindsay. And this is Chapter 7, the last large chapter, Master Level, 2 Keys to Conversing with Ideologies.
Ideologues, yeah.
Ideologue.
I can't say that word anyway.
Fire
so.
me. Fire me
Okay.
for reading. Yes, 2 keys to conversing with ideologues.
Yeah. So I guess I find that where I see a lot of observing people do street epistemology, and where I think that, first of all, I think there are 2 things that commonly fail the most. One is building rapport. So you'll see people delivering messages that cause other people's gates to go up. That's really common and happens early on when you're first learning, because you're so tempted to deliver a message, and as soon as you do, the barriers come up. And the second point of that is about kind of moral claims, because that becomes even harder, because you're basically treading on eggshells. And in that final chapter, which is kind of what those 2 would call a master level technique in having impossible conversations. And it's not quite SE in the sense that it is about having a conversation rather than having a format of street epistemology. But within the book, it's, they're both, Bogosian especially, came up with the idea of street epistemology, and, so he has that in mind and often quotes Anthony Magnabosco, who's a popular street epistemologist.
I'm unclear about the distinction. It doesn't seem like we have such a clear definition of SE to be able to say whether it is or isn't SE yet.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah,
I'm not sure.
No. I'd say that some of it goes on to refuting claims, which is where I'd say that it kind of goes slightly outside of the box.
Yeah, that goes outside of my model of SE.
Yeah. So there are what I find. So there are two things that they mention in this chapter, which I find really fascinating, and I constantly struggle to do. And one day I wish to be able to master. The concern that having conversations with ideologues is one that takes a lot of patience and time to do, and a lot of wisdom to be able to have the patience, because often you feel like they might have morally repugnant views. So let's say you're chatting with a racist or a sexist. It's about keeping your cool, and there's some really counterintuitive aspects of this chapter, which I think that's important to reiterate, because one of the first things that they talk about is actually acknowledging that the person is good, or trying to strive to be a good person. And that might seem the most counterintuitive thing in the world if you're dealing with someone who you think is a horrible individual, is trying to say that it is giving them their due, in terms of saying that they still want to, and they're still trying to be good people in the world. And I think that level of compassion within a conversation is rare, but when it does occur, it allows much bigger bridges to be built between yourself and that individual. So that's one thing that I thought was really special about this chapter, is basically saying that you need to be able to switch up your compassion sensitivities to max in order to be able to properly have a good conversation with an individual who is hell-bent on their worldview, and it's a worldview based on good or bad.
The more entrenched they are, the harder that is.
Yes. And you'll notice that there will often be triggers, because they'll be used to having conversations. If they are quite firebrand, which can be the case if you've labeled them as an ideologue, it's likely that you've done that because you've seen that behavior.
Probably.
Then they will become triggered by certain words or certain ideas, because they're so used to having to defend their views against people who basically launch an attack of direct messages. And so they will be expecting a fight, and you're not going to give them a fight, which actually can surprisingly have the opposite effect, in terms of, you think that being in all the other versions of SE, being really nice means that the other person is going to be really nice. But sometimes they're so expecting a fight, they get even more frustrated when you're not bringing out the guns yourself and doing that. And I've experienced that myself. And I didn't really know what to do with that, because I was following the rule book. I was being very nice, and they were basically saying, stop being so nice. And I was like, I don't really know where to take that, or where to go. And there's another, and this is where the final bit of that chapter, which is moral reframing, and partly to do with having a really good street epistemology dialogue, or conducting good SE, is changing your tact when you come across people who want to have a conversation in a different manner. So it might be going slightly off piece, or going slightly against some of the SE rules per se, or kind of rules of thumb, I should say. But it might actually promote a more effective conversation. And I feel at the end of the day, often SE is just about having a good conversation, more so than it is about. Sometimes I think it's more so than actually just understanding someone's epistemology. Sometimes I just want to have a good conversation with someone so that they feel like I can build up a good rapport with them. So then when it comes to some of those more trickier conversations, I'm considered part of their in-group rather than part of that out-group.
Yeah, exactly.
And the moral reframing of that chapter is all about speaking someone's moral language. So it goes into Haidt's research about how people have they have slightly different foundation. They have different moral foundations. I want to just quickly get these right because I can never remember them, but they are.
There's like 5 of them that are pretty important.
Yeah, so it's care versus harm,
predictors,
fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, sanctity versus degradation, and liberty versus oppression. So the positives would be care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty. Okay. He talks about having political conversations, and I know that this is where I think that SE for me is really effective in personal situations. Is that knowing how to navigate how people might frame things as more important or less important. So it says, for instance, effective conversations in the political arena are enhanced by keeping in mind these differences in moral foundations. Conservatives tend to respond to all 6 moral foundations with a particular propensity towards loyalty, authority, and sanctity, and less of a leaning towards care. Liberals are most concerned with care and fairness than liberty, with the other 3 foundations almost absent. So what it's saying is that
when you say liberals, do you mean U.S., Australian, or British liberals? Because those mean 3 different things.
Not the classical liberal, so not the libertarian, but those who are left leaning. So a Democrat, I think, is the language.
Okay, so the U.S. version of liberal.
Yeah,
which makes sense since Peter and James are from the U.S.
Right. Yes. Whereas when we say liberal here, we mean more of a classical liberal because we're more well read. So we mean more mild liberal than
a pluralist as opposed to left leaning. Whereas
so it'd be
I understand in Australia, the liberals are the conservatives.
Yeah, well, they are libertarian in nature, so limited government.
Yes.
Rand
Paul liberal. Yeah.
But what's interesting is saying that if you were to have a conversation, let's say about guns, if you're in the US, if you want to talk across the divide, if you're a liberal wanting to talk to a conservative, you should talk more about freedom than about care and harm. So the reason why there's a mismatch in the conversation is because the liberal cares about care and the conservative cares about authority and freedom.
Yep.
And they are speaking a different moral language. So to cross that divide, it requires you to actually change up the language that you use. And I think that is, if you manage to master that, then what that means is that you can not only more effectively manipulate the case, I think it allows you to be more compassionate and understanding of people's worldviews, because that gap doesn't seem so untenable anymore when you realize that they value some of those moral foundations more than others.
Yes. That is something that has helped me a great deal, in that I don't have to think somebody's wrong. They can have everything correct, and if their values are different than mine, we're going to come to different conclusions, even if we have exactly the same data and the same epistemology and the same definition of evidence and all those things.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's okay with me. I can disagree with people and still like them. It helps.
I think that, but I do think that's a rarity, right? I mean, maybe I'm speaking of my age group, and it could just be my bubble, but I find that people have a hard time disagreeing with one another and still, without it turning into something where the hackles are up and they feel slightly on the defensive. It's difficult to diffuse a situation, but if you're having a conversation about politics or religion, as often happens, and you come to an impasse. I feel like my age group is just not as equipped as I would like it to be when it comes to being able to leave those at the door and just love someone as a human being and as an individual. And I think that's almost kind of the number one thing I want to bring to a conversation is kind of a humanist perspective of this is an individual. They have pains and fears just like me. You know, they love just like me. And that comes first. You know, that's the first thing, even if it's someone who I think is morally repugnant. That's one of the first things that I want to bring to the conversation.
How much of their moral repugnance can you tolerate them throwing around in public before you're unwilling to buddy up with them and have a beer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't really been tested on that. So I could be speaking, you know.
Oh, you'll let me know that.
Yeah, exactly. It could be that I actually I find it very difficult to tolerate those kind of behaviors. I know that I am more tolerant now simply from practicing SEO and seeing it and seeing those who have mastered it, like Anthony Macabosco, deal with very confronting and difficult situations in a calm manner. If you know, I think, oh, if he can do it, I can do it. And
short note, on July 27th, Anthony will be our guest on this show.
There you go. I'll definitely tune in for that. He's such a lovely person.
Thank you. Yeah, he is. I'm really looking forward to it.
So I had a really bad. So I think a really good example of like where I didn't practice this is I had a really bad political. Well, not really bad. We just disagreed, but I disagreed politically recently with my sister and my brother-in-law about politics. And what I ended up doing was I threw everything out the window in terms of not delivering a message. I was just delivering messages and so on and so forth. And I even did a point where I basically belittled one of them for not knowing enough. So they said a fact, and then I showed them how that fact was wrong, and I showed them, and I quoted it. I literally did kind of a gish gallop of different facts to refute that particular claim. And so that all stopped, and then you know, so we had that conversation, and then we said,
and how was your rapport meter at that point?
Yeah, so that all happened, and then they left, and I was sitting in the kitchen. I was like, what have I just complete all the things that I'm trying to learn, and it just shows you can get so caught up in the moment. And I think one of my values is when I care about someone, I want them to hold views that I deem are correct. And I view being correct as a really important part of my life. And so I reflect that onto others. And so when I find my brother or my sister, those two especially, actually, when I find my brother or sister hold views that I think are wrong, I really want them to take on views that I think are correct. Like I really want to convince them, and it's just I can't resist. I get pulled very, very quickly into a kind of dialogue that is basically ineffective. It's not going to convince them of anything. It's just going to convince me that I'm doing the right thing, but I know that I'm not. And I suppose the point of that is saying that it's still so easy, even with moral reframing and thinking about politics and so on, to just get quickly dragged into an emotive conversation, and sometimes you just don't see it coming, and it just happens.
I lean very heavily into steel manning.
Yes,
in that one of the ways in which I'm able to be patient with an idea is to imagine that I don't know, but that they might be steel manning this position. And what do I want to? How do I want to have handled it if, in fact, I were just being trolled? And the way I like it is to say, all right, was he so patient that the troll got frustrated trying even to throw things? That's an acceptable. That's a good outcome. Also, when I'm practicing with people, if they're having any difficulty controlling their shooting the messenger or not, controlling their emotional response in the process, having a difficult time staying neutral, I will grab rather outrageous steelman claims and calmly, gently say, yes, Hitler was just fine. Or babies reveal? Well, that seems perfectly good as long as they weren't college age yet. You know, anything. We can go completely off the side with it. And I think so that's fun practice.
Yeah, it's good practice. It's really good practice. So the close relationships, the hardest thing to do SE with. So when you're detached from someone, I find it much,
Mhm.
well, when I don't know someone, I find it very easy to actually have also very personal conversations because you're not invested in the individual. So if you say something and they don't like you, you're like, well, okay, fair enough. They don't like me. I don't know them. And you're not trying to build a relationship with them. So I find that sometimes those conversations can be extremely personal, maybe even more personal than the conversations they would have with their partner or with people that are close to them, because they have no investment in getting things right with you in terms of building that relationship. So they're less likely to use, I think, sometimes anyway, they're less likely to use motive reasoning. And I found the same with myself, where I'm with strangers. Sometimes I'm more open with strangers than I am actually with those who are closest to me, although I try not to be. I try and be as open as a book as I possibly can be. Because I want the relationship to build and work. And so just like with my sister and the brother-in-law, I feel like it's really important for our relationship to thrive, and I love them. So it's really important for them to hold right ideas, well, what I think are right ideas anyway. But instead of me realizing that the way to get there is to be cordial, to build rapport, to steelman, to actually not deliver messages or belittle them, but instead to build a golden bridge for them to retreat off, for them to retreat back from their position, to make it possible for them to disagree, is actually really important. And sometimes I think that you see this when you watch debates online, or people debating. I think recently I watched the Rationality Rules and Stephen Molyneux debate, and what was very clear for me is they both had very high investments in looking like they knew stuff. So they had they had a lot to lose in terms of face if they came off as looking stupid, which meant that the dialogue was less likely to be productive, because no one in their right mind in that situation is going to turn around and say, hands up, I think I've got this wrong. I think you point towards something bad there, because that will make them look like an idiot. And there's thousands of people watching. And so all you have is two people basically swinging at each other and trying to prove that they're best. So it's not ever going to be a productive conversation. Even when you corner someone, they're just, it's not going to work. Even if their position is untenable, they're just going to say, no, it's not untenable. They'll just resort to
That's what I saw.
childlike behavior.
Yeah. No, I am biased in that particular case. I carefully read Stephen Molyneux's paper that he put in and even summarized it for my friends. And having read it, I am very biased against him. And, and so I was on Rationality Rules side from the beginning. That's
But there's the thing, right? So this is what's the beauty of street epistemology, is that so you may have a worldview that you think is incoherent or wrong, and what you think I should caveat that you think the worldview that is more correct or more logically correct, and it's trying to figure out what's the path between these two. And street epistemology is saying the path between those two is more tenuous than you think, and actually requires far more patience than you'd ever realize. And it's not a straight line in terms of you deliver information, they digest it and they go, oh yeah, and then they move.
Right.
That is really unlikely, very unlikely. And if they do that, it's likely that they're already on the verge anyway. So all you had to do was give them a quick punch. They're already part of the in-group, because I find that delivering those messages only works if they already kind of believe what you believe, and you're just trying to push them, trying to pull them back into the center of what your in-group is.
Indeed. That reminds me of an Anthony video with a guy with really great hair, who was suggesting the title something like "Atheist Converts a Muslim." That was a great video. That might be a clickbait title.
Yeah. And I think that we have we think of these things in unreasonable time frames. We think within a conversation we'll convince people out of their worldview, which particularly within fundamental. Yeah, I don't think that
shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. If you can convince me of something important inside of a few minutes, my epistemology is not very strong. I'm accepting data from you that I should check before I really shift. It shouldn't happen that fast.
Yes. It's also remarkable how I think at the moment we do not value people. I noticed, I think in the SE Discord, they had a changing my minds bit, or I changed my mind. Let me see if I can find.
Okay.
Maybe they've taken it off. I saw maybe they added one. I'm just going to have a look now.
Okay. And if anybody else would like to unmute, you are very welcome to do so. This is the open dialogue part of the show.
Anyway, I think that proving that, people, it's okay to change your mind, is basically what I'm trying to say. And I think that value should be upheld more often.
Okay. So does I see somebody is offering video. No, they're not. They changed. Oh yes, Muslim becomes atheist. Somebody put that up in the collab text. Thank you.
Can you guys
Hello, Fanny. You are my guest for tomorrow. Yes, this is Fanny, who is our scheduled guest tomorrow. Anyway, please go ahead, Fanny.
How are you guys doing? I'm kind of late, and I don't know pretty much what you guys talking before. I kind of got a little bit vegan or something.
Yeah, the first part was the claim about being a better person because vegan, and then the second part was a review of Chapter 7 of Impossible Conversations.
That I love.
And then
so I don't know what
about
you guys
SE.
want to talk now. Is that I ask you questions? You guys ask
You can
me questions? What is the thing? How does it work?
It depends which.
Hi, Harry. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
like
you.
you talking.
I think it depends. So you could ask. So if we're doing a traditional SE, often it's one-on-one, and one person asks questions and one person answers the questions. So what we just had then was juggling, asking me questions about a claim I had, a moral claim that I had, and then we went on to talk about moral claims in the context of what is in this book.
What was the claim that you had?
You've gone very quiet. I don't know whether.
Yeah, the audio is not great, Fanny.
Oh, you can't hear me properly? Can you hear me now?
I do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I need to close. What was the first claim?
Again, you've gone very, very quiet on my end. I don't know whether other people.
Oh, am I? Just a sec. I'm going to come.
Okay. I think her question was, what was the first claim? And it was, if I remember correctly, that Harry is a better person because he follows vegan practices. So following vegan practices might, if you generalize it, mean that you'd be a better person if you follow those same values.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yes,
oh, wow.
We hear you
that's
well
fine.
now. That's a lot better.
Okay. So my question was, what was the first claim?
Sure. So my claim was that I'm a better person for being vegan.
Oh yeah, no, I actually had a question when I jump off. Now I remember. When I jump on, you said something about you don't see anything wrong with cannibalism.
Yes. Yeah.
And then just before you said something about sorry, I don't want to. I'll probably not to say it right, but I think you said something about the chickens. I think you guys were on the chickens, like morals of like eating chicken.
Yeah, what's the irony of eating a chicken in front of a chicken? Yeah.
Yeah, I think my father once had to eat his pet that was a pig. So
right.
It was a traumatic situation for him. I think I remember him.
I think if we had to eat our pets, we'd be much more conscious about the other animals that we also eat.
Definitely, but the thing that I wanted to mention is, I think you said something about the harm or the suffering. The suffering was the principle that you use, but then you said something that no problem with the cannibalism, and I was trying to bring at some level of comparison. I was like, so you're not okay to eat animals, but you're okay of eating people.
So I actually have. Yeah, so I think there's a really good distinction there, and there's a really good point that you brought up. I think so. I actually have no problem with eating animals per se. is the suffering that goes along with eating animals that I have a problem with. So therefore, I have no problem with eating humans per se. It's the suffering that goes along with eating humans and the consequences of doing so that I would have problems with.
Have
So
you,
if there's, yeah,
have
sorry, go
you
ahead.
eaten the righteous mind?
I have, yes, I've
Yeah, because he likes to put that, the lady that is a vegan and says like, oh, but the person's already dead, so I don't see any. Yeah, and I agree with that idea. I don't actually have problem of eating animals or people. I actually think there is something with harm, but I think it's not an unnecessary harm. I think I just keep thinking of the vegan argument, and I think, well, we would not have so many chickens and cows. Maybe we probably would not even have chickens as a species of animal if we did not really eat them. So it's like the purpose of their existence, not just like nothing religious, but yeah, it's harvesting protein, So I'm kind of, it would be like insensitive, but I think there is the practicality. I think it is bad if you hunt, like if you go out on the woods and we hunt or we kill animals just for the skin, for the fur, for whatever, and then you throw the meat away, or we don't use properly the resource, would be the unnecessary harm. But I think when we use all the resource that you can take out of it, it justifies the use of it, and it's more.
So where I would come from is that I would say that, first of all, it's about the practice itself. So sometimes hunting could be more morally justifiable than, let's say, eating a hamburger from McDonald's, because where that hamburger has come from has meant the animal has suffered more than the deer out wandering in the parklands, and you shot it and it dies within a few minutes, or maybe even less than even in a few seconds. And then the animal has possibly experienced a life with less suffering than it if it was within a if it was commodified in, let's say, an intensive setting. So for me, and your utility argument, I think that, if we are going to have McDonald's burgers, let's also eat and use most of the animal as possible if we are going to. And I think the caveat with cannibalism, I'd say, is that I do think there are consequences with accepting cannibalism within society that may well make it immoral and make it something that I'm against. I think within a very confined context, if it had no consequences and no suffering, there's nothing necessarily wrong with eating a human being. I would like to, when you were talking before, you said that you think that in your mind, hunting is less justified than, let's say, eating, let's say a chicken sandwich from the supermarket, buying a chicken sandwich.
Oh no, I'm fine with both. I think I'm very libertarian that view. I think we should be able to hunt, definitely, and get the McDonald's anyways. That I think I even would say that I think the McDonald's is a good example of like everybody wants to punch McDonald's most of the times, or use as like one of those franchises that are abusing people, I think there is like the utilitarian view on that. Is like it's practical. This is modern society, or the modern life solutions that we end up finding. And of course, I've heard people talking about the moral of eating McDonald's every day, and I was like, wow, that is more like an individual choice and personal responsibility. I don't think anybody is really thinking like McDonald's is good, I can eat this every day. And then after 40 years eating at McDonald's every day, it's easy to sit and like, oh my gosh, McDonald's destroyed my life, we should sue and close this restaurant. We are in this era of victimization. It's pretty trending, so I think it's interesting.
Where do you think the line goes between, so let's say, the freedom of you as an individual and the freedom of others? And there's going to be, would you agree that there's a line in your freedoms might then impose on other people's freedoms? So your behavior might limit the freedoms of others. And where would you draw that line?
I think it is. I love this conversation about the freedom, individual freedoms, because I do think it is a subtle and very sensitive bubble, this idea of our duties and our freedom. But I think it's so like it would be like my rights are inside this bubble around me that is is straight touching yours, and I'm using the bubble to mean like how subtle and easily can be broken. So anytime I decide to poke into your rights, I will be breaking my rights as well, or giving you the rights to infringe on mine. So that's why we should be that careful on dealing with the individual rights. And I think the government is over us to protect ultimately the individual rights that is the smallest minority in the world, in the society. And it's not working so well because we lost the principle of what is the rights that we have. What is this thing? It's like everything is inherent rights now. It's like rights given. It's rights like it's something that you own just by being born and depending on where you are. So I don't know. It's
Do you think
whatever
people
you
have
want
those
to take
innate rights?
that. Sorry?
Do you think people have those innate rights? So you're saying a right to freedom, for instance, you were saying before. Do you think people should?
I think the right of the freedom should be the one of the principles that should be defended the first, and the freedom, I mean, like individual rights and property.
Okay,
So
and do you
just
think
those two things?
do you think that
nothing more.
translates to other animals? Do you think other animals should have rights in terms of freedom?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I've never thought about this. In which level, according to the law, like should we be protecting animals? I think we are doing that in some way, That's why when someone abuses an animal, we bring them in court, we do some stuff. We kind of, So should we be doing this? I guess so. I agree. I guess we should protect the vulnerable individuals and animals as well. So okay, I'm not putting the same level. It's not like that TikTok, the girl talking about black people and animal rights. Definitely no.
Yeah.
Just being clear, because you see how internet reacts to things. So no, I'm not saying that vulnerable people are like animals, but I'm saying that we should maybe see animals in that way. That's like something we should protect as well.
And do you think the freedom for you to buy a chicken sandwich, or let's up the stakes a bit, let's up the ante a little bit and say your freedom to, let's say, eat a pork sandwich infringes on the freedom of the pig in a way that makes it wrong?
No, I don't think so. I do think we are, as society, we are very already aware and caring and about those things, and that's why I don't even think like it's still not the best way maybe to raise a large amount of animals the way that we do for big companies, like you mentioned, like chickens and pigs, and the farms are becoming more mechanized and trying to be more efficient and maybe not treating the animals in the best way. But my way to see is like that we're doing better than before, and we are evolving this way. So you don't need to stop eating animals because we are evolving. Every time we are talking about this and trying to make it in a better way. Nobody is like talking about oh yeah, we don't care. No, people are actually buying more expensive meat because it comes with a label saying that the animal is free range raised and stuff. So I actually think we are very good at those things. We don't need to stop evolution, like that way.
So I'm hearing that we might be able to improve farms to find a middle ground between these positions. That'll be a great conversation for another day. Perhaps this will be tomorrow.
I want to
you
keep
are my
going.
guest tomorrow. We are coming up on an hour.
I just keep talking.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And I want to keep these to an hour, except on days when it seems really important to go longer. Thank you very much for all coming. I really appreciate both of you and all of you that are contributing and bringing to this show. It wouldn't make any sense to do without these people that are here with us today. Here are a couple of YouTube channels that I'm really, really into. This list will probably be including about 8 more in a few days. If you're really, really into street epistemology, we have great resources at streetepistemology.com that have been gathered by the community at large. If you enjoy this kind of thing and you would be willing to be a guest on my show,